So this will be our notes on sedimentary rocks. Hopefully you've watched the igneous one and it was useful for you to understand some things. Make sure you ask me questions if you're not sure. And so let's continue here. And so we have sedimentary rocks now. So we've talked about igneous rocks, and they form from a melt, if you remember. And these ones are a little bit different. And igneous rocks, if you remember, they had really two types: intrusive and extrusive, formed inside the earth or outside the earth. And sedimentary rocks are really quite different, and they really have three types here. So they're formed from other rocks. When they're formed from other rocks, we call them clastic sedimentary rocks. And we've done weathering and erosion, and during that process, that's where these come from. So you have rocks, little pieces of rock broke down, and they get carried away, eroded, and deposited somewhere else, and that is a process where clastic sedimentary rocks are formed. Then we also have something called a chemical sedimentary rock, and this is where water and acts in two ways. It's usually saturation is one process, where there's so much of a chemical in water that that chemical gets mixed into the rock. Also, another process, kind of the opposite, it can be evaporation. And these are often called evaporites. And so the water, the water has minerals in it, but it's, for some reason, it gets evaporated away. The minerals do not evaporate away, and it forms a chemical sedimentary rock. And then finally we have organic sedimentary rocks, where living things, the remains of living things, form rocks. And you can have things like shells, you can have plants form coal, lots of different possibilities there. The one interesting thing about sedimentary rocks is that they're 3/4 of all rocks on the earth. So when you look around most places, if you pick up a rock, it's most likely to be a sedimentary rock. Here we're a little different. We have a lot of igneous rock, and that's because of Mount Wrangell and the volcanic activity we at one time had, and also the glaciers have come through and kind of scraped those sedimentary rocks and put them somewhere else. Okay. A really important thing about sedimentary rocks, though, usually is they have layers. They form in layers. So you have rocks get laid down in at one time, then some new rocks get laid down, and they usually have very distinctive layers. And make sure you check out the reading on Actively Learn. They give you some good pictures. And also make sure you do the Sedimentary Rock ID Lab, and that will also give you a good idea as well. So the first type here we talked about was clastic. And again, going back to what I said before, weathering is really important on how these rocks form. It's just really the main basic way. And there's physical, chemical, and biological. So it can be the ice wedging. It can also be chemicals in the rocks breaking them apart, and then those little sediments can carry downstream or by the wind and so on, and they form clastic sedimentary rocks. So clastics are just formed by other rocks. And if you remember the rock cycle, these rocks can be igneous, they can be other sedimentary rocks, or they can be metamorphic. Any of those rocks, or any combination, can form this new rock. So I'm going to erase here. So moving on, and like I said, the movement to form these rocks can be wind, water, ice, but in the end they get deposited, and through gravity, the water's moving at a certain speed, it can carry a lot of particles, but usually as the waterway makes its way down toward the ocean, the slope gets less and less, and the water gets not as fast. Usually the stream will widen out. It doesn't have as much speed, so the rock pieces, the smaller pieces, finally fall out. And the same with wind. The wind dies down, the pieces fall. And then the final process where that forms a sedimentary rock is compaction and cementation. So you have these rock layers. Let me just draw a little diagram real quick. And they form. So you have this first layer forms, gets deposited, then a new layer forms, and we'll do one more, and then another layer forms. Okay, and then due to gravity pulling on all these layers, they kind of get compacted together, you know. And you also might have a river as well up here, and it's, or even an ocean or whatever it is, a body of water, and it's also pushing down as well. So all these processes push this down. And let me see if I can make this happen or not. So if I guess I can't, but this would get much smaller. So if we were going to show what that looked like, it might look like this, and then when we're done. And this is an exaggeration, so don't, right? So these get pushed together, and they get much smaller. Okay, and this is an exaggeration, so let me go a little bit bigger maybe. So these rock layers that were much more spread out, they form these compacted layers. And then once they're pushed together, they then can get cemented together. Now if they're just left like this, they're still just layers, but then the final process, cementation, where minerals in the water then work their way through, you know, and kind of all throughout the rock itself, and the minerals interact, and then they just glue it all together. And that's kind of how a clastic sedimentary rock forms. So I'm going to erase this again and keep going. And then these I'm not going to talk about as much. You'll please check these out on your the video and the reading that I gave you from Actively Learn. But these are, I talked about above. Saturation is a lot of water, too much chemicals, and or a ton of water with a lot of chemicals. Some of those chemicals settle out, and then they interact with the rock and make a new rock. This one is you lose the water. So the first one has too much water, but this one loses the water through evaporation. They form evaporites, and whatever mineral is in the rock, it gets mixed in with those pieces or whatever, those little sediments, and they form this chemical sedimentary rock. And organic, we kind of talked about these before. That's coal, similar like that. Rocks that form from living things. You can have shells from living things in the ocean that form. Rocks as well, they lose their shell when they die, and then they leave it behind. Those layers over time form rocks. You can have, if you've ever taken oceanography, there's some ooze, something called ooze, and they form from shells over many, many years as they get deposited. And there can be siliceous, formed from silica type shells, and calcareous ooze as well, and they can end up forming rocks as well from living things. So the living thing forms its shell. Once it dies, it leaves that behind, and it forms a eventually rock layer through compaction and cementation as well. And also coal, kind of the same way. You get plants and such buried quickly, pressure in the right conditions, they form coal. They can also form natural gas and oil as well. So that's kind of your notes on sedimentary rocks. Let me know if you have any questions, and make sure you annotate these and show them to me so I see that you did them.